my Savior, face to face, what will it be? When with rapture I behold him, Jesus Christ, who died for me.
So, prepared to protect is the title of my. Get over there to that. Okay, prepared to protect, a Christian responsibility. So, as Jason mentioned, today is the anniversary of the battles of Lexington and Concord, which was April 19th, 1775. And this is the first armed clash between the colonial militia and the British regulars when the General Thomas Gage took his men and went out into the countryside. They were planning to capture a couple well-known men. Paul Revere went out and warned people. William Dawes and Samuel Prescott also rode through the countryside with the, infamous, the British are coming. The British are coming. The church bells rang. Messengers went out letting their neighbors know what was going on. And because the British, their intention was they were going to the armories. They were going to get the guns, get the gunpowder, the black powder, and so forth. They planned to go house to house and take the arms. They knew that there was a lot of discontent in the colonial region because of one major factor that people often overlook, because everybody just thinks it was about taxes and a bunch of capitalists just trying to get richer. I've heard that story coming up again and again, even among patriots recently. But one of the major concerns was that Britain was arming the black slaves in the South. And if you recall the massacre of thousands of white men and women and children in Santo Domingo, or what's now called Haiti, people were very, very worried, and Britain was arming not only slaves but also the Indians and causing insurgents against frontier towns, and because you had Boston and different areas that were well populated, but people were moving west. I mean, they were going into the Appalachia region and down in the Ohio Valley and so forth, and Britain was arming the Indians. And so the deal with the taxes and the tea and stuff like that, that was just one small part of the entire region, or reason that the colonists were worried. And part of that had to do with just the fact that Britain was requiring these taxes or fees or so forth to be paid on paper instruments and taking away their currency. And we won't go into all of that. But the fact is, Britain was coming into the colonial region during the Battle of Lexington and Concord. We don't know who fired first. There's a lot of different stories about who may have fired first. But the colonists came out because they were armed. Everyone owned guns. It was just a part of the culture. They knew that it was their God-given right and duty to defend their families and their communities. And so Britain understood that if they were going to subject the colonists to any more further dictatorial powers, that they needed to get the arms. And so that's what it was all about. The British retreat finally, as they were going back towards Boston, people were coming out of the woodwork. They were coming out of the towns and the farmhouses and the woods and everywhere, and they were hot on the trail. And so that was John Adams. He said that that was when the die was cast. So we're going to talk today about the biblical justification for keeping arms, but also not just the justification saying, hey, you can't do it, but why we are supposed to, why it's our actual Christian responsibility. So just a couple modern voices that I've pulled up to kind of show you the trend among many today. I don't think I have all these on the screen, but in 2023, the governor of New Mexico, Michelle Lujan Grisham, she issued a public health emergency, and it didn't take long fortunately for the federal judges, the courts, to strike it down, but the decree said that no person other than a law enforcement officer or licensed security officer shall possess a firearm, either openly or concealed, within cities or counties averaging 1,000 or more violent crimes per 100,000 residents per year since 2021. So, and that's, of course, the Biden administration also. They placed a framework in under the guise of public health in their attempts to go after gun rights. Liam Neeson, he said, "There are too many guns in America. People should not have access to them." Alyssa Milano stated, "No civilian needs a gun, period." Michael Moore, he said, "The Second Amendment is a relic. We need to repeal it." Most older people won't know who this person is, but some of your younger people watching, Halsey, she said, "The laws of this country do not value our lives. We need better gun control." Stephen King said, "The gun culture in America is insane and needs to end." I believe it was Ann Coulter that said we don't have a gun problem in America, we have a demographics problem. So, John Legend, he said, "The idea that everyone should be armed is a myth that needs to die." Pierce Morgan, he said, "The Second Amendment is stupid. Nobody needs guns." Very eloquent. Roseanne Cash, country singer, "We need to ban civilian ownership of guns." Yoko Ono, I don't know how many young people know who that is, but that was with the Beatles there, yeah. "Guns are a disease in America. They should be eliminated." Cher, she said guns should be outlawed, full stop. Mark Ruffalo, if anyone watches the Avenger movies, he plays the Incredible Hulk. "Ban assault weapons now." And Jimmy Kimmel, he said, "We need laws that ban these weapons." Matt Damon said, "I wish America would take all the guns away." So, so I didn't put any politicians in there. I just wanted people to see kind of the cultural trajectory of people in the entertainment industry. Because unfortunately, in this country and other countries also, a lot more people pay attention to what the entertainers say than what the politicians say. So unfortunately, they are very powerful influencers. Every now and then one of them will get up and say, "Hey, I'm just here to act," or play the guitar or sing or whatever. I'm not going to get into putting my personal perspective or spin on political issues out there. But most of them use their soapbox as a means to try to influence the public. Now, during the Biden administration, in 2022, the Bipartisan Safety or Safer Communities Act was passed, and it strengthened background checks for people under 21. It created new federal crimes for gun trafficking and straw purchasing of guns. Also expanded funding for mental health services. Now, under the Trump administration, while they haven't rolled back the act, they did change the administrative process, so they're doing more focus on violent crime perpetrators and repeat offender cases. They also stripped $1 billion from the placement of mental health services in the schools. And it kind of angers me when we hear about obviously there are a lot of mental health issues in America right now. It used to be when people had issues like this, they went to their pastor for guidance and counseling. Now they have DEI specialists in the schools, which is why the Trump administration pulled $1 billion. Now, opponents to that say, oh, well, Trump doesn't care about young people's mental health. Well, no, we don't need, some transvestite giving mental health counseling to some young kids somewhere. So there are some good things. The Concealed Carry Reciprocity Act was introduced in 2017. It still has not passed. It needs 60 votes in the Senate. It keeps coming up short. Some senators who are in support of the right to carry and conceal and carry have voted against it because they believe that it's a states' rights issue, which state rights issues are very important. But the problem is the Second Amendment is a constitutional issue in the Bill of Rights. And so the state rights issues really don't apply there. So they need to either get that passed or just buckle down and pull back any infractions against our Second Amendment. Now, all right, so we're going to look here at a few past episodes of governments that disarmed the citizens before they went after the citizens. And many here are familiar with the Bolshevik Revolution. Some of the younger viewers may not. But this really began around 1917, had a very heavy Jewish influence, and they basically went after the Christians in Russia and the Ukraine and those different regions and so forth. So the picture that you're seeing here is, this is a picture of a mass grave in the Katyn Forest in Poland. In the spring of 1940, the Soviet secret police killed approximately 22,000 Poles and buried them in this mass grave. And for decades, they denied that they killed these people, and this picture was actually went around and was blamed on Germany. They blamed this mass grave, as well as other mass graves and photos and stuff that you might come across online. They blamed this on Germans. Actually, these were Russian and Bolshevik and post-World War II Soviet atrocities against people. And finally, in 2010, a lot of archival documents were released, and people finally found out that, yes, this was a Soviet atrocity, not a German atrocity. All right, here's a headline, 6 million die in Soviet famine. It's also known as the Holodomor. I wonder where they got the idea that 6 million Jews perished during World War II. Maybe it had something to do with that headline, because the Jewish population actually increased. So, all right, this is the 1905 Jewish Encyclopedia under the heading of Socialism. It says, socialism, the theory of civil policy which advocates public collective ownership, production, and distribution. Jews have been prominently identified with the modern socialist movement from its very inception. This does have something to do with the Second Amendment, because this just kind of shows the puppet masters pulling the strings that disarm the people. That is an anti-white, anti-Christian, genocidal agenda. All right, and we've got this guy here, the Century Magazine, Marcus Eli Ravij. He says, we Jews are at the bottom of nearly all your wars, not only of the Russian, but of every other revolution in your history. We did it solely with the irresistible might of our spirit, with ideas and propaganda. Now, later historians have looked at his article, and they claim that it's just satire. Okay. This is the Jewish Chronicle, April 4th, 1919. Supposedly, again, a 4-page piece of satire. why they would need to do that. They're writing to their own people. So anyway, there is much in the fact of Bolshevism itself. In fact, that so many Jews are Bolsheviks, the ideals of Bolshevism are consonant with many of the highest ideals of Judaism. So why anyone on God's good green earth would want to call our Christian faith Judeo-Christian faith, or talk about the Judeo-Christian heritage of America, just really beyond me. Now here's a few quotes from people who went through this. And I want to point out that the White Army is what they were called. They were the anti-Bolshevik military forces. And then the Cheka, they were the ones, they were the secret police of the Bolsheviks. So, well, I don't have the quotes up there. We'll go on to that in a minute. So Anton Denikin, he was the general of the White Army and in South Russia. And he said, the Bolsheviks disarmed the population and left them at the mercy of the Cheka. And then the Petro Wrangel, he was the commander-in-chief of the Russian army, of the white forces. Again, now I'm not saying white forces like they were white of their race. It's just that's what they were called, the white forces. He said, where the Bolsheviks disarmed the villages, terror followed. And then R.H. Bruce Lockhart, he was a British diplomat and eyewitness in Moscow during the revolution. He said the first act of the Cheka in any district was to disarm the population. No, I did not need to do that. Okay. Friedel Dan, he was a leader, a political prisoner, and chronicler of early Bolshevik repression. He said, the Bolsheviks disarm the people so that only the party may have weapons. John Reed, he was an American journalist, and he was actually sympathetic to the Bolsheviks, and he was an eyewitness also. But he said the Soviets ordered the disarming of all civilians. The French military mission to Russia officer reports observed that disarmament of the population is universal and enforced by the Cheka. And then the Soviet Government Council of People's Commissars, they said all firearms must be surrendered. Those who do not surrender weapons will be shot. And I do have primary source documentation on all those quotes for anyone that's later interested. It's just too many to put up on the screen. So when we talk about the Second Amendment and we talk about the different entertainers or modern political voices that say we need to repeal the Second Amendment, even a lot of your Christians, not your evangelical or conservative arm, but especially your liberal branches and so forth, I'm not sure that some of them should even be entitled to the title of Christian. Some of their beliefs are so abhorrent to Scripture. But nevertheless, this idea that the Second Amendment is somehow contrary to the peace and love of Jesus Christ and the Christian faith is gaining ground among the younger population. Fortunately, like these young teens out here today in the congregation, they come from families that understand that we have a God-given right and duty to have arms and to protect our liberties and our families and so forth. But a lot of people just don't. And so, so we'll move on to that screen that's been sitting there for a little bit. The amendment itself, it is an American legal document, but there is an important biblical principle behind that, and that is that God gives the right of self-defense. We have the right of self-defense. We have a duty to protect the innocent. We have the responsibility of households to be prepared, and we have the moral right and legitimacy of resisting violent evil. So the Second Amendment declares that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, and Christians will often ask, does Scripture support the principle behind that right? So, all right, so Exodus there, 22:2, the homeowner's right to defend life. says, if a thief be found breaking up and be smitten that he die, there shall be no blood shed for him. So this is obviously, it's not a command necessarily to kill, but it is a recognition that when someone violently breaks into a home, the homeowner is not guilty for defending their family. And if the perpetrator happens to die in the scuffle, then so be it. All right. All right, Jesus himself acknowledged arms. He says in Luke 22:36, he says, he that hath no sword, let him sell his garment and buy one. Of course, they didn't have guns back then. They had swords. So, as Scott reminded me this morning, he said, I notice you have a lot of stuff about swords there, and prior to that, it was just a good old-fashioned sharpened stick. So way at the beginning of the dawn of time, men sharpened sticks, and that was their weapon, and that's what they used to defend themselves and their family. So Jesus is preparing his disciples for a dangerous world, and the sword at that time was the common weapon. So now Jesus didn't tell them to become aggressors. He didn't say to go out and activate a revolution or excel or to get one started or anything like that. He said, be prepared, okay? He said to be prepared. The biblical duty to protect the innocent, we can find that in Proverbs 24:11. It says, deliver them that are drawn unto death and those that are ready to be slain. So this is a command to intervene when innocent life is threatened. And then we have 1 Timothy 5:8. If any provide not for his own, he hath denied the faith. And so this illustrates that provision, it doesn't just mean providing your family food and clothes and good entertainment. It means that you also provide them with protection. So a good father or a good mother, they're going to make sure that their family is protected. All right, and then we have in Judges 5:8, Deborah noted, they chose new gods, then was war in the gates. Was there a shield or spear seen among 40,000 in Israel? And so here we show that an absence of arms is presented as a sign of national oppression. And so we can recall that story. Sisera, his men and his army, they were going out, they were actually committing mass rapes and genocide of the women of Israel. And so, and the Israelites had no way to defend themselves. All right, then we have 1 Samuel 13:19 through 22. This is when the Philistines took charge over Israel. And one of the first things they did was to make sure that there was no blacksmiths in Israel territory. So it says, now there was no smith found throughout all the land of Israel, for the Philistines said, lest the Hebrews make them swords or spears. And so anytime any Israelite wanted to sharpen some sort of tool for farming or agricultural purposes or something like that, they had to actually go to a Philistine blacksmith to get that done. They didn't have their own because the Philistines knew that once the Israelites were able to defend themselves, well, then, it was just a matter of time before they rose up and threw off the yoke of the Philistines. And then we've got David here. He glorifies God who equips his people to resist evil. He says, blessed be the Lord, my strength, which teacheth my hands to war and my fingers to fight. So far from just being all, namby-pamby and peace and love and so forth, David is saying, thank God that he has made me a man that I can fight and my hands can fight and I've learned, the lessons of war. And, we need men like that can stand up and defend our families and defend our people. And David is recognizing that there. All right, then we've got Psalms 82:4. Deliver the poor and needy, rid them out of the hand of the wicked. So God does not cause people to watch evil triumph. He calls them to deliver. Proverbs 21:15. It is joy to the just to do judgment, but destruction shall be to the workers of iniquity. So justice is not passive. It is an active thing. Justice acts. Isaiah 1:17. Learn to do well, seek judgment, relieve the oppressed. And so, relieving the oppressed sometimes does mean standing between them and the oppressor. And it's a whole lot easier if you're armed. All right. Now, Joel 3:10 says, beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. So, take what you got and make sure you're armed. Luke 11:21, when a strong man armed keepeth his palace, his goods are in peace. So even again, Jesus is saying that peace is preserved by the strong man who is armed. There's no room at all for a pacifist attitude in the Christian faith. The Christian faith is an active faith. God numerous times says he came not to bring peace, but to bring a sword. Our Christian people are to stand up for the oppressed. They're to stand up against tyranny. They're to stand up against any type of governmental regime that would cause us to advocate our Christian responsibility and our Christian faith. And that is something that the Second Amendment was a civil expression of that biblical principle. So we have founding fathers that did understand that. They knew that people had the God-given right to defend life, that households had a duty to protect their families, that a free people must not be disarmed by those who rule over them, that power concentrated in the hands of the state alone is dangerous, and that liberty requires responsibility, not helplessness. And so in the colonial history, we see that keeping and bearing arms was a long tradition. Now, the New Jersey Militia Act of 1746, it said, every freeholder shall keep at his or her place of abode one good musket. So, it wasn't just an idea, hey, if you want to defend yourself, it might be something worth considering. It's like, no, hey, we live in dangerous times, we live in dangerous areas. We've got, you never know when someone's going to break in, Indians are going to come into your home, try to burn you out. Just whatever the reason is, you need to be able to protect yourself. So make sure you've got a musket. Okay, and then moving over to the actual Revolutionary War period, George Mason, he's not considered the author of the Bill of Rights, but he is considered the father of the Bill of Rights. And he said, to disarm the people is the best and most effectual way to enslave them. And then Patrick Henry said, the great object is that every man be armed, guard with jealous attention the public liberty. And then we have Samuel Adams. He said, the Constitution shall never be construed to prevent the people of the United States who are peaceable citizens from keeping their own arms. Thomas Jefferson said, what country can preserve its liberties if their rulers are not warned from time to time that their people preserve the spirit of resistance? And then we've got a quote here from a letter that he sent to William Smith that said, laws that forbid the carrying of arms disarm only those who are neither inclined nor determined to commit crimes. I really like that one because you notice, like, you go into town, you go to a restaurant, you're conceal and carry, and you go to a restaurant, it's like, no guns allowed. And it's like, okay, every criminal or evildoer, it's like, what, they're going to stop, back up, and say, oh, okay, well, I better go, I was going to commit now, hopefully this doesn't get taken out of context, because I've seen people clip quotes, but hopefully these people aren't saying like, oh, well, I was going to go in and commit a mass murder today, but, there's a sign there that says no guns, so I guess, maybe I'll try to find somewhere else that doesn't have a sign. It's absolutely ridiculous. Exactly what Jefferson was talking about right there. It's like the only people that's going to listen to any type of law about disarming are people that actually obey laws, and they're not the ones you have to worry about. So it's totally ridiculous, these ideas that people put out there, and even more absurd that some people actually buy them and think these are some sort of great thinkers out there. The strongest reason for the people to rebuild or retain the right to keep and bear arms is as a last resort to protect themselves against tyranny in government. All right, James Madison, now he actually authored the Bill of Rights. He said, the advantage of being armed, which the Americans possess over the people of almost every other nation. Noah Webster, he said, before a standing army can rule, the people must be disarmed. Tench Case, he was an ally of Madison. He actually served as the Undersecretary of Finance under Hamilton. And he said the militia are in fact the people themselves. Their swords and every other terrible implement of the soldier are the birthright of an American. Now I can see some liberals saying, well, he said right there, implement of the soldier, but they can look back up in that line. It says, no, the militia are the people themselves. I know you've all heard Johnny-come-latelys recently say, well, no, it was just the militia, just the soldiers, just the military are supposed to be able to keep and bear arms. Well, Cox is saying, no, the militia are the people themselves. Richard Henry Lee, he was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. He said, to preserve liberty, it is essential that the whole body of the people always possess arms. And then, lest we just think there's a bunch of guys that thought that, we've got Mercy Otis Warren. Now, her cousin, actually, Dr. Joseph Warren, he was killed at the Battle of Bunker Hill. There's a famous painting of that episode. But she was a political writer. She created or wrote the first major history of the Revolutionary War and era in 3 volumes. And she was a political propagandist. She said the sword was the last appeal for the preservation of rights, and that the origin of all power is in the people, and they have an incontestable right to check the creatures of their own creation. And so how would you do that if you're not armed? If the people are the authorities of the government and the government comes from the people, you cannot check their power if you're not armed. Resistance to tyranny becomes the Christian and social duty of each individual. And then John Adams, he said, arms in the hands of the citizen may be used at individual discretion for the defense of the country, the overthrow of tyranny, or private self-defense. And then later, who would become the first lady, Adams' wife, Abigail, in a letter she wrote to him, she said, I long to hear that you have declared an independency. I have always been ready to defend my home. And then she, later in the letter, she wrote about all the women that were busy in their homes and associations and clubs making bullets for the soldiers. So they were very invested in melting pewter and making bullets because they knew and understood that the lives of their families were in jeopardy. And then George Washington, he said, firearms stand next in importance to the Constitution itself. They are the American people's liberty, teeth, and keystone under independence. From the hour the Pilgrims landed to the present day, events, occurrences, and tendencies prove that to ensure peace, security, and happiness, the rifle and pistol are equally indispensable. The very atmosphere of firearms everywhere restrains evil interference. They deserve a place of honor with all that's good. And so, yeah, where's the least likely place that you're going to have trouble break out? It's in a well-armed establishment. If, I've seen people get all irate on Facebook or social media because they went into a store or Walmart or something and someone was open carrying. I love it when I go into the store and I see some, local guys carrying, a sidearm. I'm like, wow, if someone comes in here and decides to shoot up Walmart, I know there's at least a dozen guys in here that's going to pull out, they're ready, they're loaded, and they're going to shoot that bastard down. And so I love to see people open carry. All right. And then this idea didn't just stop after the Revolution. We've got the Supreme Court of Georgia, 1846, says the right of the whole people, old and young, men, women, and boys, and not militia only, to keep and bear arms of every description, and not such merely as are used by the militia, shall not be infringed, curtailed, or broken in upon in the smallest degree. And so I think what I've wanted to cover here is, one, just the imbeciles out there that are saying that we should give up our guns, and if we don't give them up, then they should be taken away. Two is the atrocities that have been committed in this world prior to revolution, just taking people's guns away, mass killings, mass graves, and so forth. It's all a part of robbing us of our Christian faith and our future as a people. And then also, just the biblical justification not only for keeping arms, but our duty to protect our families and our nation, and then how our founding fathers understood those biblical principles and invested our Constitution and Bill of Rights with, the Bill of Rights did not give us those rights. It just recognized that we already have the God-given right to keep and bear arms. And then finally, I just liked this picture. It says, "Hey, Bob, do you ever wonder if the day will come when guns are outlawed? That's the dumbest thing I ever heard. What are they going to do? Rely on nothing but the feds?" So I just come across that. I thought that was cute. So the fact is, being a responsible gun owner is a right and a duty. It's a moral and Christian obligation. It's the right to defend ourselves, our family, and our property. It's our right to resist tyranny, and it's our right to defend our Christian beliefs when they come under attack. And so I look forward after this service of going out and seeing what all arms that everyone brought here today. And with that, we'll close with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we just thank you once again for bringing our people here together for fellowship and communion, and just to hear your word and to learn more about our God-given rights and responsibilities to protect our people and our family and our faith and our nation. We understand that our people are in jeopardy, our very lives and our culture, our way of life, our Christian faith, everything that we hold and love dear is under attack. We thank you for recognizing and giving us strong men and women, capable people out there who through the years have recognized that we have a moral responsibility as Christians to defend ourselves, our loved ones, and our nation. We just pray that you will give us the courage to stand up when we're called to stand, that you'll give us the foresight to prepare for the evil days that are upon our people, and that you will give us the faith to know that whatever happens and comes our way, that you ultimately are here to bring vengeance upon your enemies, and that while we realize that we cannot depend fully upon arms, we know that you're there, that you will seek vengeance on our behalf. We just thank you in everything you do for us in your holy and precious name. Amen.